Thanks for tuning in to the Medevac podcast, powered by the Robert Irvine Foundation, whose mission is to support and strengthen the physical and mental well-being of our nation's heroes and their families. I'm one of your hosts, David Reid.
And I'm your other host, Christian Meyers. Thank you very much for joining us today on the Medevac podcast. If you're new here, there's a price for the show. You have to share it with a friend or family member if you're getting something out of today's episode. Got a pretty cool guest, so I think you're going to hear something cool. Our guest is Adam Boyd. He is a brief Navy veteran, a 10-year law enforcement veteran, and the founder and operator of Soleful Training, where he implements PTSD, training for law enforcement and first responders. Is that correct?
Yeah, just kind of take a holistic wellness approach. So we encompass 4 pillars. It's physical resilience, mental resilience, social resilience, and purpose.
Nice. Okay.
Beautiful.
We'll dive into that a little bit later, but we're going to rewind it back, I think.
Yeah, just thanks for being on the show, coming out today. And you flew in from Phoenix?
Phoenix, yeah. Okay. I actually live about 2.5 hours from Phoenix, right near the Arizona-Mexico border.
Oh.
But I have an event on Saturday in Phoenix, so it just seemed more feasible to fly in and out of Phoenix.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Well, thanks for coming down to Dallas to hang out with us today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Heck yeah. Well, like he said, like Christian said, we're going to rewind it back. You're doing amazing work now. I'm excited to talk about that. But let's talk about the fundamentals, like how you got started. Why did you join the military? Why the Navy? What kind of drew you to that world?
So after college, I was working, different jobs here and there. And then the 2008 crash happened, and I lost my house, my girlfriend, and my job all in the same summer. I kind of started like a bad country song, right? So I was just kind of like trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So I went down and spoke with a bunch of different recruiters from every branch. And I chose the Navy, frankly, because I didn't really have a swimming background. I wanted to do something that really pushed the envelope on stuff. So I went in to attempt to be a SEAL. And during my training, I ended up getting injured. I went to medical, nothing real big, just kind of a knee injury. And I went back to training, and then I got pulled off in evolution about a week later. And the corpsman was like, "You got to go to medical right now." So I go to medical, and they said, "Hey, we found something on your femur." And then just through some more testing and whatnot, I got disqualified from my dive physical. And then shortly after, the Navy just sent me home. So
that's unfortunate. Yeah.
What was, like, if you mind diving in, like, what was the identifying issue? I mean, this is something you didn't even recognize or know, right?
So this is what I was told. I was told that there was some potential structural integrity issues. I remember talking to my chief at the time and said, like, I could be a liability to the teams, and they just couldn't take the chance on me. So I ended up getting out of the Navy and kind of moving on. After the military, I guess I grew up in Cleveland. I went back to my mom's house, and I was like, I went from, losing everything I had to like making a 180 switch to go into the military to try to do, one of the hardest things that is available. To doing nothing again. And I just went on this roller coaster of emotion. Frankly, I was probably drinking way too much.
Understandably, yeah.
And then I remember this very vividly. I was sitting on the floor of my mom's house, and I was hammered. And I was with a friend of mine, and there was a song that came on that just kind of triggered something different in me. And I woke up the next morning, and I had a text message from a friend who lived in Phoenix. It was like, "Hey, I have a place for you to stay if you want to try something different." So I literally packed my bag of clothes, my dog, and $300, and I moved across the country with no job, no anything but a couch to stay on. So
nice.
Shortly after that, I was able to get a job as a personal trainer. I was not very good at sales, so I did not do real well at that job.
Yeah.
And then I got hired. Like, I remember we got a new manager in, and they fired everybody who wasn't meeting numbers. So there was like 10 of us on staff. I think 9 of us got fired that day. I get home, and I'm like, this is not happening again, right? Like, I went from this to this to this, and it's just this roller coaster again. I wasn't home an hour, and I got a text message. It wasn't a text message at the time. I think it was a phone call probably from Arizona Department of Corrections at Salt River. And they were like, "We want to offer you a job." And I was like, holy cow, like this could not have happened at better timing.
Yeah, right.
So I did that for about 15 months, and then the opportunity for me to go into a different police department opened up, and I kind of started my law enforcement career there.
Okay. So you were correctional?
I was corrections for about 15 months, yeah.
And what did that look like for you?
You would go in every day and you'd feed the prisoners, check the bays, the bunks, work the control, work the doors. And honestly, for the most part, it was very menial. I don't want to say that. That's not the word I'm looking for.
Mundane.
Yeah, it was fairly mundane. And I didn't work at a state. It was a tribal jail, so it was a lot smaller of a population.
Oh, okay.
So we didn't have like a lot of the same issues like the state correctional facilities did.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of bored with the job. And then when I saw an opportunity to go to the road, I kind of took that.
Okay. So where did you transfer to?
I transferred just to an agency just outside of Phoenix.
Okay.
And I spent about 11 years there. I worked the road for about 5 years. I worked investigations for a little over half my career.
Nice.
I specialize in domestic violence, more specifically strangulation. And then I spent 3 years working on our SWAT team.
Now, what is working a strangulation investigation, like being specialized in something that specific? What does that look like?
So what our
Does it happen
department
that often?
found was we had a detective that trained me, went through this training in South Carolina specifically for strangulations.
Okay.
When you start training people on stuff on what to look for, our numbers started to shoot up because now we're training our officers to investigate strangulations and ask the right questions. So what happened was our numbers started to go up, and now they wanted to put more people through that training to investigate strangulation cases.
Interesting.
So I just happened to be kind of the next man up. Went to South Carolina again for that specific training, and was able to implement some better training protocols for our officers.
That's very cool. Does that happen that often?
It happens a lot more than you think, yeah.
Really?
And is this like to death?
No, so most strangulations, I would say a good 95% of them don't result in death.
Okay. So there's certain markers you look for where, is that how you confirm that someone's talking about it? Or if they're like, hey, my husband strangled me. What, like, how's that work? I'm sorry. I'm ignorant to that kind of.
It's not something I've heard of.
Yeah,
like,
it's
as
very
often,
interesting.
like I hear domestic violence, I'm assuming a strike or a fight or even a stabbing, something along those lines. But
A push into a wall,
Yes.
I don't know.
yeah,
So what is
just seems less common to me. I don't
So a strangulation could be, is if you wrap somebody or your hands around somebody's neck and constrict their airway, even to the slightest degree, it's considered a strangulation.
know. Okay.
So when we started to train our officers on which questions to ask, where did he put your hands? Where, what did he do this? Did he do that? It started to prompt more strangulation investigations. So there's some signs and symptoms that'll come up during those investigations. If it's bad enough, they're called petechiae, and they're little red dots, and they'll happen like in the eyes generally, but they manifest themselves in a bunch of different areas. They can be in the gum line, they could be behind the ears, in the hairline. So then we started to teach our officers to look for those signs as well. A hoarse throat. So, we would start telling our officers, hey, ask the victim, like, do you normally sound like this? Do you suffer from a sore throat? Or, have you been sick within the last week?
Yeah.
And, and it started to really help our investigations because once strangulation's established, we can now say that's an aggravated circumstance.
Okay.
I was gonna
So there
say.
is certain markers that, a push versus a strangulation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the state of Arizona, aggravated assault, domestic violence would be considered like serious bodily injury. So did you break a nose? Did you have to go to the hospital for anything? And then you start adding strangulation in there because that's one of the predictors of violence that would result in death. So they did like a huge study on domestic abusers who had murdered their partner with gun violence. And what they found was 9 out of 10 cases had strangulation involved in that relationship.
So that's extremely important to build a case and put that in as well. I mean, I'm sure that helps with your suspect list quite a bit too, to narrow that down. Hey, this guy's got a pre-existing condition to strangle people.
Yeah. So when you can't bring up like prior bad acts within like a specific case. So let's say I get assigned a case where she was strangled, and he had done it like 3 different times. Now, there is a set of circumstances where I can get those cases in, but it's try to think like a serial killer where there's like a signature of sorts. So like we have to be able to prove that like all of those are kind of related, and there's some signature that goes along with it. So if we can't prove that, then that's a standalone strangulation case. I forgot where I was going with that.
Yeah, it's building a case.
Building a case, yeah. So where it comes into play is at sentencing. So I can bring in all those prior bad acts at sentencing to say like, hey, there's a problem here. He's going to eventually kill her. This is what the data suggests. And we can hopefully get a harsher sentence on somebody that's exhibiting that type of behavior.
Do you see often in domestic violence the spouse, whether it's mostly the male attacking the female, I'm sure, but do you see that protective nature come out too? Because I hear that all the time too, as officers arrive at the scene, very defensive spouse. No, he loves me, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, domestic violence cases can be one of the most difficult to investigate, whether you're a male or a female officer. Because as a male, your instinct is to want to protect. The reality is when you're investigating those type of crimes, women also are abusers.
Yeah, sure.
So you have to be able to keep an open mind and let the evidence speak for itself.
Yeah.
And that's where kind of your experience on like asking questions, looking into their own history. And after a while, you'll start to learn, it's the same people over and over again.
Yeah.
And we had where I worked, we had what we call a habitual offender. So if you were convicted of 2 domestic assault cases within the last like 5 years, I can send it to the feds for a habitual offender status.
Okay.
And that was one of the things that we aim to do for the people that you see all the time, because domestic cases are difficult to prove.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing that the state, I know the state means well for this. They usually say, hey, look, we're going to take over prosecution. You victim, we want to protect you. But the reality is rules of evidence don't allow some things to come in if the victim doesn't testify. Like I can't testify on that victim's behalf because that's considered hearsay, which is great during pretrial hearings. But when it actually goes to trial, we need that victim to testify. And then you'll get the victim to say, hey, I thought I didn't have to do anything. You said you were going to take this case over. And it's like, well, yes, I can get in all the photos. I can get in, different things. Yeah. But I can't get in your statements.
Yeah.
Now, there are some exceptions to that. Dying declaration's an exception to it. Also, one of the things that we used to do is teach our officers when they arrive on scene to ask questions in a certain manner to elicit a medical response.
Oh, yeah.
So, which is not considered hearsay. It's considered, you're trying to help somebody, right?
Yeah.
So if they arrive on scene and I say, who did this to you? And she's like, my boyfriend hit me, that's going to be considered hearsay. If I say, how did that happen to you? And she says, my boyfriend hit me with a baseball bat. And then I relay that information to get medical help because I'm trying to assess that scenario.
Yeah.
That could potentially be argued as not hearsay and get in at trial.
Is that, so we kind of see that in assault and battery as well, right? Is usually most of the time there's a better case when a medical provider arrives on scene.
Yes.
Is that exactly the reason why? Is because when the medical component comes in, we can kind of bridge that gap a little bit and have more data, I suppose.
Yeah, because it also lends to the credibility of the statement. So if I'm doing the investigation, I say, listen, this is what she told me. This is what I found. These are the photos I took. And then medical staff has a very consistent story. The injuries line up. The doctor says, hey, she's got a broken cheekbone. And I say she got punched in the face and I saw bruising. So like it just bolsters the evidence in that case to make it a little bit easier to prosecute. Because my goal as a detective was to not have that victim take the stand.
Okay.
And oddly enough, and I spoke with a very seasoned prosecutor about this, when a victim testifies, they lose the case more often than not.
Really?
It's a weird phenomenon.
Well, I mean, they get torn up on the stand, right? And then all of a sudden they just back up and start backpedaling. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot to that.
Yeah, because we always have to account for like the human element when it comes to these cases. And what they found is that juries tend to see the victim as vindictive if they testify against their abuser.
Wow.
Interesting.
It's very interesting.
So there's a bias before they even hit the stand.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Interesting.
And of course, this is not always, but this is just something that, I had talked with that prosecutor and he said like, hey, this is what they found kind of nationwide. And then we started to see it in our own cases and you're like, wow, this is actually happening.
A real thing.
We're trying to get justice for this victim.
Yeah.
And he's getting acquitted. And then they look at the justice system like, well, I thought you were going to help me. And now we're standing here like, I wanted to help you. I did everything I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now he's out and about and now she's fearful for her life. And now we look like the bad guys.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Did you see a lot of that frustration for you, as a law enforcement officer? Is we hear about these kind of things all the time. It's like I know this man did it, but I'm so tied up in the legal system and like there's no ramifications for it because it's all hearsay or something like that. Is there frustration that comes along with that?
Yeah, there's a lot of frustration that comes along with it. I think Denzel Washington in Training Day said it best. Like, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove, right?
Yeah,
and that's our entire job.
Yeah.
Like, I know somebody did it, but I have to be able to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. Mm-hmm. And that takes a lot because the reality is I don't want to put anybody in jail that's they didn't do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you also have to consider, and this happened to me twice that I can remember because they were very distinct cases. I ended up putting the quote unquote the victim in jail because they ended up not being the victim. And a very, very serious case that I was starting to work, she was broken up. I mean, bloody face, bruising, broken cheekbone, like the whole nine. It looked real bad.
Yeah.
And they were frequent flyers of ours. And I'm doing the interview and we're kind of getting information about what happened. And I'm like, we're ready to go arrest this guy, right? So I'm like, well, where is he? So we start going to family, friends' houses, like always known places. And we find out that he's at the casino. We're like, oh, perfect, right?
Cameras.
Well, it turns out that he had been there for about 8 hours. And when I confronted the victim with it, she had paid somebody to assault her to frame him for cheating on her.
Whoa.
But if we wouldn't have had that video footage at the casino, we would have put him in jail for a long time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because
How do you handle a case like that? Right? That's multifaceted, right? There's a guy who beat someone up for money, which is illegal. Right? So do you go after him too? Or
it was a woman actually. She paid a friend to do it. Yeah.
Wow. Beat her up.
With those baseball bats you get at like the ballpark? They're like this big.
Yeah.
Little Louisville slugger.
She was using one of those.
Damn. I mean, that's commitment. Like,
also, she was pretty banged up, right? I mean, maybe like 50% less.
Yeah, so we ended up charging her friend and her for false reporting.
Okay.
And then oddly enough, 3 years later, I ended up putting him in prison for strangling her.
Huh.
So they had a very volatile relationship. He was not a saint by any means.
Sure,
Yeah.
But the reality is he didn't do this particular crime, and he shouldn't have to answer for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Regardless of his past. I mean, you should answer for the crimes you're committing currently or previously, but to be framed for one.
Yeah.
It's a hard situation. I've listened to quite a few interviews with the Amnesty Project, and they help get, wrongly convicted people off of death row. That seems to happen more often than you would think. It's very surprising to see that. Obviously it's not always about the police work. It's, sometimes about the prosecution, things along those lines, or the jury making those decisions. But it's scary to think about that being a possibility.
Yeah.
Spending the next 30 years in your life for something you didn't do at all.
Especially if you're being framed. I mean, without that video camera, he would have gone to prison. I had another case that I worked, and I was on patrol. I wasn't a detective at the time. So we see her, she's crying and she's a little bit beat up. Nothing serious, but probably like a minor assault is what it looked like. Okay. And she's dirty and crying, and I'm doing the interview, and it just seemed like a simple assault. So we get her the ambulance, and I go to the house where he's at, and I knock on the door, and we're talking and whatnot. And this truck pulls up, and he's like kind of shouting at me, and I'm like, sir, just give me a minute, right? And he's like, I need to talk to you. He's very adamant. And I'm like, I'm in the middle of an investigation. Like, just give me a minute, right? And he's like, no, I need to talk to you right now. And I'm like, all right. So I just kind of detain this guy, put him in cuffs, throw him in my car real quick. And I'm kind of irritated. I'm like, what is so important that you need to interrupt me during this? And he's like, I worked the night construction crew and I saw the whole thing. And I was like, okay, that's pretty important.
Yeah.
So I do the interview on him. As it turns out, the reason that she was dirty and a little bit beat up is she was pulling at his shirt and she was falling down because she was drunk. And all he was doing was this to keep her at bay. And without that witness, again, I would have had a simple assault. So it wouldn't have been years in prison.
Still.
But I would have wrongfully imprisoned somebody through no fault of my own. Yeah. But the investigation and the facts would have landed that he assaulted her.
Yeah.
And that her story was credible. And it turns out that's not the case.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So this guy was detained because he was like, I gotta tell you something. It's so aggressive, man. Yeah, calm down.
Come on out. Yeah. Go ahead.
Please.
Oh, I was going to change the subject. So
I was just going to say, from a mental health capacity, like, how did that affect you? Like strangulation cases, assault and battery, domestic violence.
That's where I was going with it.
It's got to change your perspective. Same.
I mean, we're all human beings. Like cops are human beings, right? Just like anybody else. And the way our brain works is we like patterns of behavior. So yeah, there's no way you can do the job without it affecting you.
Yeah.
Because you're going to see negativity day in and day out for years on end. And there's really no checks and balances for your mental health. Like nobody's checking up on you. There's no, mental health assessment you need to do yearly. Mm-hmm. And that can compound over 20, 25-year career. And there's a reason why we have high divorce, high suicide, and high alcoholism rates, because there's no way it doesn't affect you.
Yeah. Well, we interviewed Derek Ross this morning. He's an Army veteran who lost his leg in Afghanistan. But we were talking to him specifically for about 15, 20 minutes about police officers and the amount of PTS that they must have compared to most soldiers, even special operations guys who have gone through and seen a tremendous amount of shit. I would argue that you guys see, exponentially more. You're in it every single day. And then to be expected to go home and hug your kids after, or like talk to your wife after, you've just cleaned up a suicide or a crazy car accident or chased down a suspect. I mean, these number of things, compounding issues, and being expected to do that day in and day out. Military, we have a plethora of nonprofits. I mean, we're sitting in one right now, right?
Right.
We're sitting in one right now. We have thousands and thousands of nonprofits that cater towards the military. And I rarely ever see anything specifically for law enforcement or, God forbid, firefighters, because I think there might be 4 nonprofits in the USA that cater towards firefighter mental health, which is, it's absurd to me. So I'm really glad to see that you're taking an initiative here, but I'm sure that's the reason why you started your business, was to start addressing these issues, right?
Yeah, because I saw nothing that was proactive, and I've always been proactive about my health, right? So, I started ultra running when I was in my late 20s. I've always tried to take care of like my nutrition and get sleep and whatnot. And then I didn't really make that link until a little bit later on how closely tied like mental and physical health was.
Yeah.
So if you would ask me like 12 years ago, like how to take care of yourself, I'd have been like, well, just go work out and eat right, Yeah. But there's more to it than that. And so when I got onto our SWAT team in 2016, 17, maybe it might have been a little later than that, my SWAT commander was like, hey, you run ultra marathons. Can you start putting together like a program for our guys? And I was like, well, I don't know anything about training anybody. And about a week later in my inbox, I get a strength and conditioning cert. So I went through the strength and conditioning cert and then went through nutrition. And then my chief was like, hey, you're doing some good things for SWAT. Can you put together like a little wellness program for the department? So I did that. And then she nominated me for the FBI National Academy Associates Resilience Train the Trainer. So which I ended up getting selected for that. And that was like the first time I really like put together like the mental health link and like, kind of looked at it like a holistic way. And I was like, oh man, I've been missing this whole section of health like over here, and I just been kind of primarily focused over here. And then fast forward, it was right near COVID. I had a buddy of mine that was on the SWAT team with us, like, I'm going to this thing. I don't know what it is. I don't know. And I was like, he's like, well, you're into health. Just come with me. And I was like, all right, cool. So I show up and it's a Wim Hof class. Are you guys familiar with the Wim Hof method?
Yeah.
And it's taught by a retired frog. And he was telling his story about, the TBI and getting blown up in combat and like how it saved his life. And, it was a very compelling story. And then you go through the whole method. And I remember driving home that day and I was like, holy cow, is this how normal people feel? Like, I want to feel like this all the time.
Yeah.
And then I went home and I started practicing the breathing method and some of the mindset techniques. And then the cold, obviously the cold's kind of made its way into the mainstream the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And like a week later, I told my wife, I was like, I got to get like one of these cold tubs. Like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then a couple months go by and my relationship started to change. The way I was at it was work started to change. And then I just hit a point and I was like, I need to teach this to other people, because if it helped him and it helped me so much, like what could do for anybody else?
Yeah. For the audience, can you explain Wim Hof breathing method and what it's used for, what it looks like?
Sure. So the Wim Hof breathing method is, so there's two types of breathing. There's upregulation and downregulation techniques. So the Wim Hof method is an upregulation technique, very similar to like breath of fire. So where you would breathe very deeply for about 30 to 40 repetitions. And then on the exhale, you would do a breath retention near the bottom of the breath and kind of go through a little meditation for about a minute and a half or so. And then you would take a deep breath in and then exhale. And then you would just continue that cycle for about 3 to 5 rounds. So some of the benefits is one, the upregulation technique teaches you how to amp up your nervous system, right? So, and then the retention, you're actually using your own mindset to relax that upregulated physiology. So what it's teaching your body to do is I can control my own nervous system. So using my breath, I'm going to ramp myself up, and then using my mindset, I'm just going to be able to relax myself back down. So it's good for nervous system regulation. There's also a lot of benefit for immune boosting. So by the deep breathing, again, we're going to activate our nervous system. We're going to upregulate our physiology, and it's going to put us into that hormetic stress. So the way the hormetic stress works is we're going to stress the body out just a little bit to create adaptation. Very similar to like working out, right? So if you go into the gym and you absolutely smoke your muscles way beyond fatigue, there's not going to be a ton of benefit there. But if you do it the right amount, you're going to come back the next day and compound, and you're going to get bigger muscles, you're going to get stronger. And that's the goal of the breath work. We're trying to do that like a cellular level. One of the other things that the breath work does is it allows us to oxygenate our blood a little bit better. So when we're breathing, and I notice this with a lot with first responders and military, we have high resting respiratory rates. So a high resting respiratory rate is going to signal to our body that we're in a stressful state. So what we can do with the Wim Hof method is, can we back up just a little bit? If we are in a stressful state and our resting respiratory rate's high, what we're not doing is allowing our body to relax and fully oxygenate our cells, because we have those nice shallow breaths. But if by getting those deep breaths down into the bottom of the lungs, we can actually push the oxygen into our bloodstream onto the red blood cells. And then during that breath retention, when the CO2 levels rise, it's going to help kick that oxygen off those red blood cells into the mitochondria, into the cells. We're going to create energy, and it's going to help energize the body.
Very interesting. Is this something that you do every day?
It's something I do. I do some form of breath work on a daily basis.
Okay.
I may miss a day or two here and there,
sure.
But I like to vary it. So the Wim Hof method, I'll do about 3 times a week. And sometimes I'll do a down regulation technique. Because one of the things that the Wim Hof method, it does a lot of great things, but what it doesn't do is train your CO2 levels, which is really going to help that resting respiratory rate. So if we can create a tolerance to CO2, which is our drive to breathe, then we're going to lower that resting respiratory rate because we don't feel the need to actually take a breath because we have a tolerance for it.
Yeah.
The Wim Hof method is not going to help with that. So I want to kind of balance between like the upregulation, getting the immune boost, making sure that I'm getting like full oxygenation with making sure that my resting respiratory rate is also lowered. So I'm working my breath at different angles.
So let's talk about the down regulation aspect of it. So we talked about upregulating. What does down regulating look like for you?
So down regulation, I use a 3-3-6-0 method. The reality is whether you use 4-7-8, you can do it multiple different ways. It all has the same outcome.
3 up, 3 down, hold for 6.
3 up, 3 hold, down for 6.
Okay.
So we want to try to create that 1-to-2 ratio of in to out.
Okay.
And then the breath hold again helps with that CO2 tolerance because it's allowing it to rise. It's also creating pressure within the lungs to push the oxygen into the alveoli and into the bloodstream so we can create that oxygenation in the cells.
Is this a forceful inhale?
Just a normal inhale.
Okay.
And then hold and then out for 6. And that 1-to-2, about 1-to-2 ratio is going to tell our nervous system that, hey, we can chill out. And if you do that for about 3 to 5 minutes in the morning or after you get home from work. So one of the things that I try to tell our first responders to do is when you're sitting in your driveway before you go see your family, take 3 minutes, do a down regulation technique, kind of center yourself, and then bring a positive vibe to your family. And it's really good for like after action plans. Like I was trying to get the last SWAT team that I taught to do this. Like after you go on that call out, whether you feel okay or not, take 3 to 5 minutes to down regulate your nervous system. Because let's say that call out's at midnight, you don't get out of there till 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. Well, your physiology is still at a stressful state. Even if it's not really known to you, it's still elevated.
Sure.
So we want to make sure that we're getting good sleep so that down regulation can help you sleep. If you do it after a call out, after a bad call, when you come home, there's a lot of different ways that you can implement into your life. And it doesn't take that long to do.
A couple of minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, even 3 deep breaths can make all the difference in the world.
Absolutely.
And how often are people doing that? You're absolutely right. Is like when we look at kind of those mindfulness practices, a lot of people, don't even take 3 breaths. They're just breathing really shallow all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you collect any data behind this, or is this how long have you been doing it?
I've been running the business about 18 months actively. I'll collect data in a couple different areas. So, obviously physical fitness assessment is going to be one because it's the easiest thing to measure.
Yeah.
Did you improve your 1.5 miles? Did you improve your push-ups?
Yeah.
But your mental health's kind of subjective. So I have a mental health questionnaire that they'll do before and kind of after the program.
Yeah. Like a DSM-5 or?
I'm curious, implement, from a fitness perspective, VO2 max after all this breath work. Do you see any difference?
In VO2 max?
Yeah.
No,
right?
so VO2 max, you're going to have to kind of, you're going to have to create a hard enough workout to adapt. So,
right. Okay.
VO2 max is great for your HIIT. I do like a 4x4 method when I'm running.
Yeah.
It's like a hard 4, easy 4, do that a couple times.
Yeah.
But the breath work's going to help more with like your heart rate variability versus the VO2 max.
Okay.
So those are 2 of the biggest things that I try to focus on. So VO2 max and heart rate variability are 2 really good predictors of longevity and resilience. So we kind of focus on doing things that'll improve both of those.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay. So what kind of training do you guys implement with your SWAT teams?
SWAT would be a little different. So SWAT, I focus a little bit more on like the mental side versus like the physical. Okay. Just because a lot of the guys already have like their own routine, like they're already, doing what they need to do in that respect. I do have a program for them. If somebody's like, I want to switch it up. Like I usually give them options, right?
Sure.
Maybe you want to run a marathon. Maybe you want to, focus on VO2 max. Maybe you want to focus on hypertrophy, whatever it is. So they usually have a couple options to choose from. But with the SWAT teams, I'll generally focus more on social dynamics. So a lot of the I don't want to say quote like the tough guys like don't really feel like they need that social connection that goes with human beings, but we're all built the same way.
Yeah.
So I focus on that and the mental resilience and taking care of yourself after the calls. Because the one thing I see with SWAT guys, well, with like special operations guys, you've been trained your whole careers to tough through everything.
Yeah.
When it comes to your mental health, that is the complete opposite approach that we need to take.
Yeah.
And it's hard for guys to switch off from being this guy to like the woo-woo stuff.
Yeah.
And that's really where you're going to create that balance between being good at your job and being good at your family and your longevity.
So what are some of the things that you're implementing with them on the mental health and resiliency side then?
So one, I always open with the morning with gratitude. I know it seems like a cliche thing to do, but the reality is it works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, I wake up every morning and I say whether out loud, I used to say it out loud. Then my wife yelled at me. She's like, shut the fuck up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, it's a great day. It's going to be amazing. And she's like, everybody's sleeping. I'm like, all right. So I'll go outside and I usually get some sunlight, do some grounding and just, hey, you know, today's going to be an awesome day. So even if the other 23 hours and 59 minutes are terrible, I at least have that moment where I'm starting to build that neural pathway. Like every day is a restart, right? So like patterns is really in behavior, the repetition is really the keys to everything. And then in the evening, I'll write down 3 things that went well that day. Cause it's really easy to be like, oh man, I didn't get the client that day, or this victim wouldn't talk to me, or whatever it is. So I try to focus the end of my day on something positive. I got to have lunch with my daughter. I had a really awesome turkey sandwich today. It doesn't matter how minimal or how dumb it seems.
Yeah.
But you're just scanning, you're forcing yourself to like scan through that day, right? Like, oh, that sucked. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, here we go. And I think when you start doing that on a daily basis, it stops that that spiral out of control, right? Because that's the goal when it comes to your mindset. So if you're having a bad day, it's really easy just to go down that spiral and be like, yeah, this sucks. Oh, you know what? This sucks too. And now you're down this bad rabbit hole of like, you know, my best friend in 2nd grade, you know, whatever, you know, and so we want to stop that spiral. And by doing something in the morning, at night, every day, you're going to slow those spirals down. And eventually you're going to be able to come out of that downward spiral real quickly. So obviously we're not telling people like, you're not going to feel sadness. You're not going to feel grief and anguish. Like you're still going to experience negative emotions, but it's how you respond to those emotions and how quickly you come out of them is what we're trying to train into people.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I really like that. I think it's a fantastic approach, and it trains you. You know, a lot of people, if they've been through therapy or CBT specifically, one of the things that they talk about in cognitive behavioral therapy is negative filtering. And in this aspect, you're training your mind to do positive filtering. So if you're doing that, like you said, even if it's menial, I had a great turkey sandwich today. Well, if you do that repetitively throughout the day, you're going to start looking for those positive events as they're happening. And if you're implementing gratitude at the same time, well, now you're going to be thankful for it as well. Much better than, oh, good thing happened, on to the next thing, and then dwelling on the negative.
Exactly.
It's a fantastic approach. I really like that.
The other thing that we do is it's reframing and trying to teach people to reframe, you know, the situation. I heard this story a couple months ago, and it kind of stuck with me enough where I've started to implement the story into my trainings. And it's, how does Mother Teresa, if she rolled up onto a car accident and somebody died in her arms, how does she view that scenario? And, you know, the answer, you know, and usually inevitably because of who she is, they're like, well, she's grateful for the opportunity. And like, they're always very positive about it. And then when I'm like, well, how do you view it? And like, you know, and then they go the other way. And I'm like, why can't we view this situation just like Mother Teresa did? Why don't we view that you had the opportunity to potentially rescue somebody, or you had the opportunity, you know, to spend the last moment on earth with somebody, and like kind of value that scenario versus being like, this is the worst thing that I've ever seen. And, you know, how you view things in your mind could definitely play a role in like how you're going to view other scenarios, and that's going to affect your longevity.
Oh, absolutely.
Frame shift.
Yep.
Absolutely. I mean, you could do that in absolutely everything, right? As if you're on the assault bike and you're like, man, this sucks. This is hard. But if you kind of reframe, if you will, and you say, hey, every pedal that I do, I'm getting better.
Yeah. Getting a great workout today.
I'm getting a great workout, and I'm my cardiovascular system's working. I'm getting better every day.
That can energize you just
That could.
all the same.
That could.
And that's actually the reality behind the cold plunge, at least one aspect of it.
Yeah.
That's my biggest.
I see people on like TikTok, or I've seen a couple gyms do this, and it drives me nuts. Their like spokesperson will get in and just like suffer through it. And I'm like, that's not the goal of the cold bath. Like the goal is for you to learn how to relax during a stressful scenario.
Like it's a hot bath.
Exactly. And reframe the situation that you're in. Be like, okay, it sucks that I'm in here, but I love it.
I keep the fight before I get in.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I take my clothes off, get ready for the cold plunge, and I'll sit and stare at it for 30 seconds or a minute sometimes. Like, God damn it, I don't want to do this. But as soon as I get in, like that's my goal, is try to relax and let go.
Yeah.
And let the timer go off when it goes off. I use it as a form of meditation, and I find mental resiliency with it too. That's why I keep it a little extra cold some days, because I find mental resiliency with it. I don't want to sit in that. I don't want to sit in that thing. It sucks. It sucks.
I don't either. And I thought I was the only one. So I had to go out to Spain to get certified. So the Wim Hof method, by the way, is the only certification that I'm aware of that actually teaches people to teach cold exposure.
Okay.
So everybody else just kind of, freelance or freestyles it. But so I'm thinking like, okay, I don't want to do this, but all 60 other instructors here, like I'm going to be the oddball, right? Mm-hmm. And then you start talking to people that also teach this, and you're like, oh, nobody wants to get in.
Yeah.
Right. Like I mean, we all don't like it.
Yeah. We both have a cold plunge, and every time you face the fight with that thing, but once you get in, that's what it's all about, is conquering the breath, relaxing into it. It's almost like a forced meditation if you really think about it, because there's really not much things you're thinking about after that.
No, and when
it's
the
like,
moment you get out,
breathing,
you feel amazing.
Yeah, it's like 12 cups of coffee right to the dome piece.
Yeah, and that's the other piece that people forget. You are present when you're in the cold.
Oh yeah.
You're not thinking about your bills, or the fight you had with your partner, or like you're there. And how often are we actually present in this world? We're always thinking about something, right?
Yeah.
And that's my 2 to 4 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever.
Exactly. 3 to 6 minutes of like, especially in this day and age where we're so inundated by our thought process. We're living in the future. We're living like on the next fictional aspect of your life. When you're there for 3 to 6 minutes, you get 6 minutes of being present in that moment.
Right then and there.
Yeah. It is interesting to note too, is like there is specific training based off of that method as well, because it can be quite dangerous if you're breathing incorrectly in cold water.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the upregulation technique that I talked about earlier, that is not something you want to do in the ice bath.
Yeah.
So these are something that is done very separately, because the upregulation breath can cause some dizziness. And this is the other thing that goes with it. When we start to deep breathe, we start to push down our CO2 levels. Again, that drive to breathe.
Yeah.
Well, you can hold your breath for a really long time. So there have been people who have drowned because they've gotten in the pool after doing the breath technique, and they're trying to
2 on the William Hof method, right?
Yeah. And they're very explicit in the training to make sure you tell everybody this is not breathing over here, cold over here.
Yeah.
Because you do not do them together. Because if you don't understand your trigger to breathe, you can have a shallow water blackout.
Yep.
And then we have a tragedy on our hands, and that's what we're trying to prevent.
Yeah.
The other thing with the cold, you talked about safety. Longer is not necessarily better.
Yep. I'm glad you brought that up, actually.
So I've talked to a lot of people that are like 20, 30 minutes, and I'm like, you're not doing yourself any service by going that long.
Be injuring yourself.
Yeah. And I kind of equate it to like marathon training, right? Like if I told you to go for a 4-hour run for your training run, you could potentially injure yourself. Yeah. But if you work your way up to an hour and a half or a 2-hour run, you're gonna be good to go. The cold bath's very similar.
Yeah.
We want, when you're starting out, you want to start off nice and slow and then build your way up. But there's still kind of a point of, it's not really doing much else. They say when you're training for a marathon or an ultra, like after 3 hours or 2.5, 3 hours, you're not really doing yourself.
Yeah.
It's kind of the, can't remember the term I'm looking for.
Plateau.
Yeah, very similar to a plateau where
Negative returns.
Negative returns, that's
yeah.
what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's going to be a point of negative returns where you're not doing yourself any more benefit. And if you would have just stopped right here, you get all the benefit.
Yeah. And what, in your experience with your training, what, like, tell us a temperature and a time that we're looking at here, because I'll have friends that are like, 39 degrees for 15 minutes. And I'm like, that's not good for you.
should not
like,
do
that's not good for you, period. They're like, well, it feels good. No, that's bad for you.
Yeah.
Not necessarily bad, but you know what I mean? It's like the effects for that 3 to 6 minutes, you're going to get the same effects as 15 minutes, right? My question to you is like, where do you kind of see that leveling out?
It can vary depending on the individual, depending on your past experiences, your training, your cold tolerance. You want to start the cold around 59 degrees. That's where we really start to see benefits. Anything colder than that or the length of it, this is a good litmus test. If you get out and you're shivering for about 15, 20 minutes afterwards, you went in too long. I mean, you're obviously going to have a little bit of shiver when you're done.
Okay.
That's why the Wim Hof method teaches you to warm the body up naturally with the horse stance. So that way you can, couple minutes afterwards, you can function completely normal, get your workout out and do whatever.
I've done it sometimes where I'm shaking for an hour after.
Yeah. So that's called an after drop.
Okay.
So if you go long enough, that after drop can cause some serious issues. But we want to make sure that we're reining that in and that we don't hit that point. So kind of play with it. If you can go 2 minutes and that's too long, then start at a minute. If you can do 7 and you're good to go like 2 minutes afterwards, awesome, good for you. So it can be a very individual thing.
And it could vary day to day too, as I've noticed, is like sometimes, especially like if you fasted or, you had just a cup of coffee that morning and then you dive in, like it could last 15, 20 minutes after. But, I get to a point too where it's almost like a challenge to myself. I'm like 3 minutes is too quick, David. Like we got to go freaking 7 today.
That's that first responder military mentality right there. Just we can do more.
I'm going to do 30 minutes of this thing.
It's not always necessary. So I personally do 38 to 42 degrees is where mine kind of hovers, and I shoot for 4.5 to 6 minutes. That's my typical every day. I choose a song that's between 4.5 and 6 minutes and just let it play, and I close my eyes.
Yeah, that's a great time frame to do it. I'll take breaks from cold plunging.
Sure.
If I feel like I'm adapting too much, I'll just take some time off, take a couple weeks, a month off, and then work on something else. Maybe I'll focus more on meditation. Maybe I'll focus on grounding or something different.
Sure.
What do you typically see in your experience when during the day it's the most beneficial? First thing you do when you wake up, after you work out, after maybe some contrast there. Like when are you seeing kind of a consistent like balance to that, or is it all dependent?
I think it can all be dependent, but I like it in 2 spots. One, first thing in the morning, because I think it sets a tone for the day.
Yes.
Just very similar to the gratitude practice. And 2, after a hard day's work. I think that can also be that reset. We talked about like writing down the 3 things. But if we have a bad day at work, coming home and then conquering something and feeling good and creating that neural pathway that like, and now you can, it's hard after a hard day's work. You got kids and they just want to play and you're just exhausted. And that's the last thing you want to be as a parent, is exhausted for your kids.
Yes.
I want to be able to give them all the energy that I have.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good way to reset and kind of step out, recenter yourself, take that moment to be present. And then I tell my daughter, like, just give daddy like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And she'll come over to the tub and she'll like stick her hands in. Yeah. She's 4. So, and she'll be like, Daddy, can you dip my feet in?
Yeah.
So like, I'll pick her up and I'll just dip her feet in. Like, but now she's seeing dad do it. She's seeing mom do it. And we're trying to instill those wellness practices into, a 4-year-old as well.
No,
Safely.
Yes. Yeah. Safely and appropriately. Right.
Yeah.
Now, something that Dave and I talk about, because we've seen conflicting data on this for hypertrophy. If you're doing it prior to an exercise or post exercise, like if you're lifting specifically, I've heard rumblings that it can kill hypertrophy. And I don't know that it's necessarily true, but I'm curious if you've heard, I mean, you've been to these training environments, you've taught a lot of people. Have you seen anything?
I would err. I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen that it interferes with hypertrophy more often than not.
Okay.
So to err on the side of caution, I would probably do the cold plunge before your workout.
Okay. I'm just simply curious because we've gone back and forth and
Yeah,
it's
I
hard to
personally
tell.
like to do it after my workouts too. Started in the mornings for sure, and I still do sometimes right before bed as well. But after the workouts, and honestly, from NFL training protocols, this is what they do after they train very, very hard. They like jump in, and also I kind of look at it from the capacity of a contrast therapy. Yeah, right. Your body heat and your temperature goes up quite exponentially during your workout. So you're almost getting that sauna-like effect. Then you're getting right into the cold plunge. So
inflammation's high.
And remember, with the NFL protocols, their goal during the season isn't hypertrophy.
Yeah.
They're not trying to build muscle. They're trying to.
And that's
perform.
also not my goal at this point. Is I don't want to get any bigger. So like that's kind of where I'm at too. So maybe I just don't want to do it in the morning. All right. No.
Because we have this conversation back and forth, fairly often. So I was curious, but on the changing the mindset piece, actually, you had one a couple of months ago. I guess you texted me. You were like, "I'm fucking sitting in traffic." You were pissed off about being in traffic, or like something had gone wrong that day.
That doesn't sound like me.
You're upset, and I was like, "You were like, you're upset about it." I'm like, "Go home, like get in the cold plunge as soon as you get there." You texted me like 20 minutes later, like, "Yeah,
It helps.
Cold plunge."
does help.
Changed everything. And I had the same exact thing. Like a week after that, I was sitting in traffic. I was upset about something, all poo-poo about something. And I get home, like pull in the garage and the cold plunge is right there. I'm like, you know what? You know what?
Might as well get in.
That's awesome.
Let's give this a shot. Yeah.
Well,
dive in and yeah.
Yeah, it does. I think it helps. I think it's wonderful. But it's amazing work what you're doing. Is there anything kind of we missed kind of on what you're doing here?
My goal is to take a proactive approach.
Yeah.
I've been to more funerals for heart attacks and suicides than I have been for gunshots. And, if I embark any knowledge onto the agencies or units, is start early, start in boot camp, start at the academy, start with your young officers, firefighters, when you're 4.
Yeah. Have parents that teach you this.
Yeah.
Because I want I want them to armor their body and their mind. I kind of, like if you're in a firefight, do you want a vest or not a vest, right? The vest doesn't guarantee that it's going to save your life, but it's going to give you a better chance. Yeah. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish is to give them a better chance.
Beautiful. Well, thanks, Adam, for coming on and showcasing what you did. Your very interesting career as well. Your mindset for those experiences too is uplifting as well. And I'm sure that it's resonated really well with your family. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Where can we find you? You have a website, Instagram, social media, any of that?
Yeah. So it's my website's www.solefultraining.com, and it's soulful, like soul of your foot, SOLEFUL. Okay. And my Instagram is soulful_training.
Perfect. Well, we'll have that linked in the description there. Go click on that. If you want to get in touch with Adam, that's probably your best way to do it. Thanks for joining us, brother.
Yeah, thank you.
This has been the Medevac podcast, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next week.
See you next time.
Bye.